Howdy, I'm the Chinese Zodiac Killer, described by the media in conjunction with the so-called Federal Justice Department as a cannibal killer. I was arrested by the FBI Terrorist Task Force in 2022, and after finishing my sentence of 16 months in federal prison, I was just recently released a couple weeks ago, 6 months early, from a 3-year sentence of supervised release, also known as federal probation. So then, how hard is federal probation really? I don't use drugs, so for me, it was more of an inconvenience and an annoyance and a psychological stress than anything. Drug tests are common, even for me, and a failed drug test would likely result in a return to prison for anybody. When I first started, I was immediately visited at my home by 2 officers inspecting my place. I had no issues. Soon I had a new probation officer, James Mathers, who was basically like a bully. He also inspected my home and, for example, busted my balls for having an Xbox. And even though my bedroom walls had painter's tape on the walls and fresh coats of paint, he implied I was lying about painting my bedroom because I didn't store my paint cans in there, and then demanded I paint my living room instead. None of these things are violations of probation. I could see basically he was enjoying just fucking with me and pushing me around, busting my balls and insulting me in my home, to get a reaction. I stayed calm. A hostile reaction would have put me in prison, which is what I'm sure he wanted. He's trying to, trap me in that. So who you have makes a difference. If you get a jerk, play it cool. Patience is your best virtue. In time, he was replaced, and the next guy, Matt, was very fair, kind, and relaxed. He never gave me an issue, and soon my status was lowered to being unlikely to reoffend, and then I had a new probation officer who was very friendly. I actually never met her and only communicated by email until my supervision period ended. Annoyances included being required to call an automated number every single night for perhaps a year to see if I had a random urine test the next day. Eventually, I didn't have to call, and they would call me if I did instead. Now, this was problematic for employment. If I was called, I had to leave work and report, and since I deliver auto parts, that meant parts late in the day might not get delivered that day to the repair shops, meaning your mechanic perhaps told you your parts for your car were scheduled to come a specific day, and your car would be done on a specific day, and you, the customer, plan your life around that specific day only to not get your car back because the federal government demanded somebody who delivers the parts reports in for your analysis instead. Now, any requirements ordered by the court were required to be attended to and supervised by probation. In my case, I was ordered to take therapy, so I'd find a therapist and stick with it till I was released by my therapist and report to probation every time I went. Any contact with law enforcement had to be reported. I also had to fill out an online report each month by the 5th. Reporting how much money I had in my bank account on hand and other assets, as well as a list of cost of living expenses and any payments made over $500, who lived with me, all that kind of stuff. I was also restricted to a district, as anybody would be. For me, it was the Northern District in New York State. Basically, everything north of Albany and east of Auburn. To travel out of the district's a violation. So to leave the district, you have to fill out a questionnaire. And this basically wants to know where you're going, when you're returning, where you're staying, why you're going, and personal information of anybody that you'll be in contact with, like their addresses. I was never denied, although I didn't make my request until later in my probation period, after a long period of compliance and work history, but I was given permission to go to Boston, New Jersey, Rochester, New York City, downstate, to all sorts of concerts I wanted to see, as well as a festival in Pennsylvania to see Slayer, and several days in Baltimore to see Maryland Death Fest last year. So this was, like I said, I had a job and I was compliant and cooperative. Not having a job is a violation. You have to prove that you're looking for work, and you have to work a requirement of 30 hours a week. If you don't get this done, it's a violation. This was frustrating for me at first, and also because international travel was restricted, and I play in a touring metal band called Penetration. I've toured Europe 3 times. The government basically shuts your band down. Other than that, you can't have any contact with any other convicted felon, which is, in this country, there's a lot of felons. The U.S. locks up more people than any other country on earth, and But I've kept a low profile other than my TikTok and YouTube, which was pretty brazen. I'm ripping on the government the whole time, but I don't think they knew about it, and I was basically ignored, and that's what you want to do. You want to stay out of the spotlight, jump through all the hoops like a trained dog, and let the focus of their attention stay on the fools who are screwing up and the sex offenders and stuff. Now, I'm also not a sex offender or a drug trafficker or something, so I'd imagine if you're one of these people, you're going to have a lot tougher time. There was a terrible psychological stress that came with federal probation for me. I knew if I was violated, I'd go to prison. I was also on county probation, so getting violated for one would result in getting violated for the other. If so, I faced 70 years in prison. Now, imagine how this severely impacted my psyche in a negative way. I would have rather died fighting to the death in desperation to survive as opposed to surrendering. And that makes me realize probation was far more problematic for society than beneficial for me or law enforcement. It's like living with a gun to your head. I was calm and cooperative, but I was resolved to die before surrendering if forced. So given that I theoretically could have hurt somebody or myself, if so, obviously the overreach and overly strict policies of the so-called justice system would have had catastrophic potential. I kept a low profile, I cooperated, and I slipped through the cracks as a serpent once again. So thanks for everyone's support. That's one thing I should say. Having a great support system of friends and family is crucial. The system is set up so that if somebody's alone with no money, you got almost no hope whatsoever in beating this trap. This is why so many people reoffend. They lose everything in the process, and there's no way out of the trap that the system sets for you through probation. So having people care for you and a great support system is the greatest benefit of all to beat this horrible curse that they stick you with. I'll try to answer any questions or comments if you would like to, so leave any if you wish, and I'll discuss the topic more extensively in the next video, so don't touch that dial.